Hello, everyone. My name is Anthony Deighton. I'm Chief Marketing Officer here at Celonis. I'm joined by Jeremy Cox. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items. Just want to make sure everyone is aware of. The session that we're doing today, and we're thrilled that you've joined us, the session we're doing today will be recorded and it will also be made available to you afterwards. So you can watch it again or share it with your colleagues. There's going to be a question and answer session at the end. We encourage you to ask questions. You can presentation by using the Q&A panel that's there. You can just type the question in and then we'll pick them up right at the end. And your line is on mute, so any background noise that you have won't disturb the conference. So with that, let me quickly work through what we're going to cover with you today before I introduce Jeremy and then turn it over to him. So we're going to start the webinar with Jeremy himself, and he'll talk about the need for transformation generally and also the current state of digital transformation. Then we'll transition to me, and we'll actually introduce the new Celonis Intelligent Business Cloud. And at the end, both of us will be available for Q&A, which again, you can enter right there in the panel. So let me introduce Jeremy, who is also on the line. So Jeremy Cox is a principal analyst at Ovum as part of the customer engagement team. He focuses on customer engagement strategies and the underlying platforms. He's really a world expert on what it takes to help organizations transform, and having seen this presentation before, he has some really fascinating and interesting topics to share with us. So with that, let me turn it over to Jeremy and have you join us in the conversation. Jeremy.
Thank you very much, Anthony, and thank you for the build-up. Most impressive. And hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. Right, let's move on. So first of all, I'm going to start by looking at why there is the need to transform fast. And I'm sure many of you will have seen similar graphs before, but one of the striking things, I think, if we look at the S&P 500 ever since the mid-50s, is the average lifespan of a company has dropped quite dramatically from back then 75 years down to now around about 20 or even less. And McKinsey did a study not long ago which indicated that if this trajectory continues, then by 2030, something like 70% of the existing S&P 500 would be out of business. Now, clearly, fundamental to this is an inability to remain relevant to customers. So whatever the financial consequences of their decisions, at the core of this will be a lack of relevance to customers, hence the reason for going out of business. Okay, and I think that we now live in what I would call an intensely Darwinian environment, where it's not about being the biggest or the most intelligent, but it's about being able to adapt and adapt at the right pace to remain relevant. And I'm sure you've all felt this, but speed of change seems to be accelerating all the time. And of course, disruptions come from all sorts of sides, from internet native competitors, as well as companies that are further ahead on their transformation journey and who are beginning to get traction with their customers. Okay, and of course, adaptation is not a one-off exercise, but it has to be continuous, because the target is constantly on the move. Customer expectations are shifting on a regular basis, their behaviors are changing, and what they expect from organizations is on the rise. So it's a very difficult world in which to compete. And there are things that are outside our control, various sort of conditions in the market, but there are things that are under our control. And I think when we look at complexity in particular and think about customers, I think this is an area where it is incredibly complex. So even though customers frankly want a simple and positive experience, and will go through all sorts of different channels in the course of their journeys, actually delivering that is incredibly complex. And then on the ambiguity side, we're getting mixed signals. Many organizations can't see what's going on within the organization, let alone what's going on outside the organization. So developing strategy in that kind of environment is incredibly difficult. And then going back to customers, of course, there are things that we would like to be able to do. We would like to increase the relationship duration so that customers stay with us longer. It would be great if more of them were responsible for the delivery of profits. In many organizations, they actually soak up a huge amount of cost and erode profits. We'd like to increase the number of customer relationships. And we'd also, over time, like to optimize those relationships by increasing the value the customer receives, and as a consequence of that, increasing the value that the enterprise receives. So those are the broad sort of customer-related strategies, if you like. But it would be impossible to deliver those unless we innovate continuously to remain relevant and also deliver a superior and rewarding customer experience. And for those that get it right, the opportunities are absolutely vast. This report by my colleagues forecasting the digital economy in 2025 reckon it'd be worth $4.6 trillion. So there's lots to go at for those that can adapt and take advantage of these opportunities. Now, every year we do some very extensive research on a global basis across multiple industries who look at their buying intentions, their priorities, but also the state of digital transformation. And what we see here is that of the 9 digital transformation initiatives, the one at the bottom in this chart is what we call Omni-Channel customer or citizen engagement strategies. And what this shows is that only about 10% of enterprises feel they're on top of this, and another 20% feel that they're making some progress. But the majority of organizations are either at the early stages or haven't even started. So really there's a lot to go at, and they're at risk if they don't make progress a lot faster than this. Now, we do have a poll on in this where you can state where you feel you are, and I'm just going to launch this now. And so, thinking about your organizations and your digital transformation journey, where do you feel you are? Have you not started? Are you at the early stages? Are you in progress? So there's quite a lot being done, well advanced or complete. I'm just going to leave it there for a minute, and if you could just click the poll buttons, and at the end of this we'll share the results with you. Thank you very much. Okay. Right, I'm now going to close the poll and we'll examine the results at the end. Okay, back to this. Let's have a look. Here we go. I've done a comparison of last year's results with this year's, and what you can see is a gradual shift in the right direction, I hasten to add, of slightly more organizations feel that they've already got a clearly articulated digital strategy. A few more have moved into the advanced state, which is good. The majority are still in the progress phase, and early stage, not started, and fortunately not relevant, have dropped considerably. So there is progress, but it's happening at a very, very slow pace. And that's just on the digital strategy. Now, go back to that omni-channel customer engagement strategy. Again, there's a similar shift happening. But I think what this shows is that, you know, if you think all revenue or profit comes from customers, omni-channel customer engagement strategy, or strategies that help an enterprise to deliver a positive customer experience, really should be progressing a lot further than this. And the pace of progression is proving glacially slow. So I think it's in that background, that we need what I'm calling transformational accelerators. Now, some organizations have adopted a let's digitize department by department or line of business by line of business. But I think what that does is it just reinforces existing silos. And as far as customer experience is concerned, silos are, you know, kill the experience. So any kind of strategy, any kind of digital transformation strategy really has to be a coherent enterprise-wide, you need a coherent enterprise-wide approach. And it needs to be founded on some fundamental principles. And I've split this into two sort of sides of the equation, if you like. There are the business principles, and then there are sort of architectural practices to fulfill these strategies. And the first one is to center the transformation on the customer. And this demands leadership from the CEO. In fact, without it, I think it's impossible to do. Have in the back of your mind this idea of persistent customer relevance, going back to that chart of all those organizations that are you know, beginning to die. Determine the business model. So there's a lot of change potentially with you know, digital means enabling new business models. So, for instance, direct to consumer for organizations that are perhaps further back in the supply chain than, say, retailers, for instance. And it also needs a chief customer officer's perspective when looking at the customer. So don't leave this to the front office to figure out. You know, if I think about customers and customer experience, they pretty much touch all parts of the organization. So if you order something, for instance, on a commerce site, it has to be fulfilled. So it also has an impact on the logistics and the finance systems within the organization and the supply. So it needs that broad perspective. And from an architectural practice perspective, rather than the traditional waterfall approach, which takes years to figure out, and by the time you've actually implemented something, what you've implemented is redundant. More adaptive enterprise architectural approaches are needed, which are founded on agility and the idea of figuring out how can we make adaptation a fundamental capability of the organization. But it's also got to be done in a very coherent fashion, so that each part of the enterprise is contributing towards the same goal, the same purpose. Be mindful of the existing IT landscape. There may be legacy systems which are either too expensive to change or frankly do a reasonable job now anyway, but don't be hostage to your IT landscape. And use agile accelerators like process mining. And the reason I was so interested in Celonis, having seen them a couple of years ago at an SAP conference, was just how effective they can be in accelerating progress by making the current state of processes that traverse the enterprise and making those visible, and ultimately eliminate silos. Okay. So if I think about a digital accelerator like process mining, I think it can contribute a huge amount to the transformational exercise by clearing the fog and also building the business case for change. So you can get rapid insights into the current state of processes. You can quantify the impact on customers. So where exceptions take place and there's a lot of paddling like fury underneath the water, the impact of that can also be quantified. But it's not just about looking at the start of the transformation, but also looking further ahead and as you transform, to understand, what is the likely impact of making these changes? What impact would that have on our customers? And what's the business case for change? And I think fundamentally, it's a very good device for creating consensus by making the consequences of our processes visible to everyone, so that you can start to collaborate and figure out how to resolve or improve those processes. Now, I'd like to pass over to Anthony to actually take you through what they can offer.
Well, thank you very much, Jeremy. That's a great introduction. I particularly appreciate the thoughts and focus around the idea of breaking down silos, because I do think a lot of transformation initiatives struggle with this question of silos, so I think we can certainly agree that's an important part of the story here. So let me jump ahead here and throw one slide forward here. So one of the things we're announcing today, actually yesterday, is what we call the Intelligent Business Cloud, and really sort of the next era of the Celonis solution. And if we take a look at some detail about what is the Intelligent Business Cloud, let's dig into some of those details. So at its core, the Intelligent Business Cloud is built on the process mining technology that Celonis really helped commercialize and develop. And the core idea behind process mining as a technology foundation speaks exactly, Jeremy, to what you were talking about earlier in this concept of breaking down both organizational silos, but also system silos. And that really is about how we look at the what we call digital footprints that exist in the underlying systems that organizations are using to run and manage their business. And we look at the digital footprints, and from those digital footprints, we can actually recreate or understand, provide visibility to the process that generated that. And those footprints really span both systems and organizational silos. From there, we have built out a range of important components which comprise what we call the Intelligent Business Cloud. The first of which is what we call event collection. And the idea behind event collection is that in the cloud, you need to provide connectivity to these operational systems. And as part of the connectivity, we need to understand the data in those operational systems so that we can create what we call an event log, which is what we use as part of the process mining technology to derive those underlying business processes. The second major component is process discovery. And this is the area in which we actually show the user, show the analyst, what the as-is processes are and all the variation within that process. Third is process analytics. So here, we're actually providing a link to a powerful analytical engine, which is tied to that same process view. So we can actually look at, and this is, to your point earlier, Jeremy, this idea of building the business case. This is really how we can calculate some of those metrics, some of those numbers that help an analyst figure out what's the value of changing or improving this underlying process. So these first three components are really analytical processes for understanding and analyzing those business processes. And the fourth is what we call the action engine. And this is where we take the insights, the process insights from those first three steps and turn them into action. So how do we actually engage not just the analyst, but actually the entire organization in driving transformation, business transformation? How do we actually get people to do their work differently to actually improve that underlying process? So those are the four major components. On top of that, we have developed what we call the Intelligent Business App Store, where we actually package these use cases together into what we call apps, which really make them accessible to business users, and you can literally just install them and use them. So maybe, Jeremy, might be better than talking about this stuff is actually just to show it off. Like, let's actually see the Intelligent Business Cloud in action. So to do that, let me just grab my browser here. Actually, maybe Jeremy, I'll assume everyone can see my screen and someone will yell at me for a different. Okay, good. So to show this off to you, what would be fun is let's take this from the perspective of an actual user or customer. So how would a customer experience the Intelligent Business Cloud? So they wouldn't actually start with any of the technology. They would actually start with the Intelligent Business App Store, because the App Store is what provides that connection between the business process and the actual use case that we're going to get value out of. And so we've divided it into exactly those two areas. The processes, which represents the connection to the business process, and the app, which represents how we're going to get business value out of that. So if we take the process, I happen to have access to an SAP system, but you can see all of the different systems that we have access to in connectivity built into the Intelligent Business Cloud. So you can see, for example, SAP, JD Edwards, Jira, if you're doing engineering processes or trouble ticket processes, Oracle, Trello, etc. So the whole ServiceNow, a whole range of different systems. Now I have access to an SAP system, so we can take a look quickly at all of the business processes that we have here for SAP. And if we look at the order to cash process, that is maybe a really useful place to start. And what we can do is we can click, install process, and we can actually get access to this process. What we do is we actually create a connection. I have an SAP system literally running in our test center, and I can actually connect to it. I'll spare you the connection details. Answer a couple questions about currencies, that sort of thing. And now the Intelligent Business Cloud is actually reaching out to that running SAP system, looking for the data associated with order to cash business process, making that available in the Intelligent Business Cloud. And in a few seconds, hopefully, you will have access to, here we go, the process overview for that order to cash process. And I can open up the process overview for the order to cash process. And taking a look at it right here, what you see, we've looked at 1 million sales order items in this test database. You can see the order to cash process. We receive the order, we confirm it, we generate a delivery document, we ship it, we send the invoice, and the customer pays. Now, of course, everyone on the call is going, well, no, duh, that's the order to cash process. Like, that's pretty obvious. And in a way, that's exactly the point, because I didn't tell the system ahead of time what order to cash process or what process I was looking at, that this is the order to cash process. It actually figured out this order to cash process through the data in the underlying system. And that's where this gets really exciting, because not only are we looking at this, the most common case for the order to cash process, but we actually have access to every single variation in the process in this test system. So, for example, you can see that here we're covering about 42% of all of the sales orders. And you can see that up here as well, 418,000 sales orders out of 1 million, that's 42% approximately. And we can also get visibility into the next most common process. So the next most common process is we receive the order, we confirm it, and then we extend the delivery date, which is another way of saying we tell the customer it's going to take 2 weeks to deliver, and then we tell them, nope, no, we meant 3 weeks. All right? So that's clearly not a good customer experience. If we look at the next most common variant, now we're up to about 3/4 of all of the possible variation in the system. Here, we do a credit check. And actually, this is sort of an interesting example, because not all variation is necessarily bad. Of course, credit checks are an important part of any process. But if we look at the throughput time, we can see that in the case that we do a credit check, we receive, or in the case we don't do a credit check, we receive the order and immediately confirm. But when we do a credit check, it takes us 3 days to approve the credit check. And inexplicably, having approved the credit check, we wait a whole other day before we confirm the order. And a great example of how just having visibility into the process lets me see opportunities to drive value. And we can keep going down this road. It's sort of fun. You can keep adding variation into it and see what's happening. Here, we're getting a goods return, probably a quality problem, or here where we send a reminder to the customer after we've sent them the invoice, probably opportunity there. And at its extreme, we can see every single possible variation in this order to cash process, which of course is, quite a bit of variation. And this is really the power of process discovery, because what we're able to see is both the most common variation in this process and every piece of detail in it. Now, this is a lot of fun, and it's certainly a great way to see a process, but it doesn't actually help us solve an underlying business problem. And to do that, we want to go back to that app store. And this time, instead of looking at the connection to the process, let's look at some business applications that are written on top of that. So you can see all of the process areas here. Let's look at order to cash, and let's think about customer satisfaction. That's always an important driver of a nice a nice application to show value. And here you can see the customer satisfaction on top of order to cash related to the SAP ECC system. This is a pre-built set of analysis that's relevant to this business process. And to install it, all I do is hit Get App, and literally that moves it over into my workspace. So you can see my order to cash process overview has been augmented with 3 new pieces of analysis relevant to customer satisfaction in order to cash. And one of the ones we were looking at, so I'll pick it, is the on-time delivery. Now, on-time delivery is an important driver of customer satisfaction. Clearly, we saw some opportunities for improvement in this business process related to on-time delivery. When we open this up, what we see is pre-built analysis around on-time delivery for order to cash. And you can see here, for example, the on-time delivery rate, 73%. You can see what the throughput time from having received the order to shipping it is, and also what the distribution of that is. But now what we can do is show the value of connecting this analysis to the underlying business process. So let's look back at that example where we were having extending the confirmed delivery date, and let's select all orders in which we extended the confirmed delivery date. So here you can see we're looking at all orders which flow through or contain the step extend confirmed delivery date. And you can see that the throughput time's gone up to 11 days. And if we look at that by customer, you can see the impact from a customer perspective on extending the confirmed delivery date. You can see, for example, Queen Industries is the customer for which we have the most examples of extending the confirmed delivery date. Now, this is great if we're trying to, as you said, Jeremy, try to figure out what the business case here is. Like, how do we understand the impact of this process variation? But it doesn't actually help us do anything. So how do we fix the problem? And to do that, we can actually look at the open sales order items. So these are all of the sales order items which are currently open. So there are about 61,000 sales order items which are currently open. And we can look at ones which are large, which have a high net order volume, and where there are relatively few days until the order is going to ship. So let's look at just these ones here. These are ones where there are 5 sales orders, which are both large, and there's not many days until the customer expects it, but the order is still open. And so this is where you can affect change. So here are the 5 sales order items that if we want to make an improvement in this process, we would actually go in and figure out what's going on in that order. Now, reasonably, anyone on this call could look at that and say, that's really, really valuable, but you're relying on an analyst to go in and figure out which of those sales orders are open. And that's a very valid point. And it's exactly why we built the Action Engine. Because what the Action Engine does is effectively do that same analysis and many others, which we call skills. It does them in the background over time and supported by a powerful AI engine. And so let's look at the Action Engine in the context of Olivia, who is a order management clerk. And what we see here is a list of actions that Olivia can take to improve the on-time delivery rate and customer satisfaction of the order-to-cash process. And let me give you an example of that. Let's just pick this one here. Here you can see for a particular order, there is a credit check pending, and the engine notices that if we were to approve this credit check, we could increase the probability of being on time from a delivery perspective from 20 to 86%. And again, perfect example. We noticed earlier when we were looking at the process overview that the credit check was getting in the way of delivery times. Here, the action engine has actually figured that, has noticed that on a particular order and alerted the person responsible and said, hey, why don't you go ahead and take a look at this one, because this is the place you want to focus your energy. And we can actually drop you straight into the underlying operational system to go ahead and approve that credit check and actually make that order ship on time. And you can see what we have here is a list of actions that, in this case, Olivia, as an order management clerk, can take to improve this range of underlying business processes. So we collect all of these concepts together into what we call the Transformation Center. And this gives me an overview across all my business processes, from purchase to pay, to order to cash, accounts payable, et cetera, about what metrics we're worried about and focused on. Here we can see that on-time delivery again. We can see it over time. What actions we've taken or are taking to improve that underlying process. And as we make success, as we hit thresholds, we actually deliver that as what we call customer success story, where we actually gather up that success and share it with the team that worked on it. So with that, let me jump back here, and I'll just wrap up by saying, the value of this is, and sort of linking these two conversations where you started us, Jeremy, how we build that business case, that there's also the importance of actually recognizing the value that focusing on your business in this way can create. So if you look at an example like Siemens, which has fundamentally transformed their order to cash process globally, eliminating 10 million manual activities a year annually and saving, multiple tens of millions of dollars as a result, there's significant business value to doing this transformation. Or if you look at an example like the work that Vodafone's done on the other side of this coin, so to speak, on the procurement side, looking at how they can increase what they call the perfect purchase order from 73 to 87%, and actually having touchless invoices up by 63%, there's significant business value to those kinds of transformation initiatives. So with that, let us quickly summarize here. So what Celonis announced yesterday, what we're sharing with you today, and hopefully is valuable, is what we call the Intelligent Business Cloud. And it's really software to support business transformation. Historically, business transformation has been the domain of consultants and whiteboards. Here, we're actually building software for managing business transformation. And it's more than just looking at your process, but it's actually allowing you to turn those insights into action with what we showed you in the action engine. Entirely delivered on the cloud with pre-built applications in the Intelligent Business App Store. There's a significant opportunity for everyone on the call to join this growing community of people that are working with Celonis based on this process mining technology. So let's have some Q&A, and let's think about how we're going to manage the Q&A here. Let's see where we have the questions in the polls here. All right, so how do it's actually too small for me to read, or too big for me to read. So this first, so Jeremy, do you want to talk about the poll that you did earlier and what the results of that were?
Let's do that. Let's do that, because I've just looked at the numbers, and it actually seems to echo that research that I was pointing to. So the bulk of organizations are in progress, which is encouraging. Some, a sizable proportion are still very much at the early stages. And then as we look at the well advanced, actually that's certainly a higher percentage than we saw in our research. But in terms of complete, down to just 1%, which is even lower. So I think this is, it's reasonably reflective of the state of the market, I think.
So, but wouldn't you agree that it seems that this audience is a bit more advanced than from where you were from a research perspective?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe their interest in a webinar from Celonis is indicative of that.
It could be a little bit self-selecting. You're right. Yes, I think you're probably right. But it reminds me of long before I joined Ovum, I was doing some consulting work at a government organisation in the UK, and it took us around about 6 months to identify the processes within the organisation and map them. And at the end of the day, we were never entirely sure that those processes were a true reflection of what actually happened. So it was very anecdotal, on top of various sort of Visio process maps, etc. Whereas looking at your presentation and your demonstration there, you're getting some pretty hard facts and some great clues as to where things are broken, where urgent attention is required. And so I think for those at the early stages, that would be incredibly important. And even for those in a more advanced state, being able to take an honest look at what's actually going on, what's actually happening, and then find new opportunities for further improvement, I think would be incredibly helpful.
And also prioritize, because oftentimes when what you look at, you just look at the thing which is most obvious as opposed to the thing which is most valuable. So one of the attendees asked the question, can a process mining technology also sit on Excel to capture process steps, or must it be connected to an ERP or some kind of operational system? And the simple answer to that is, and I did actually, if you looked at this list of connectors, one of them was Excel, and it is absolutely the case that you can have what we would call an event log. You can have a data stream which is available, in Excel or even a comma-separated list. I should also add, just for completeness' sake, we actually provide a whole range of out-of-the-box connectors, but also a framework for connecting to any underlying system, and that is actually very common. In many cases, these business processes are run on custom software, on mainframes, on other kinds of software. And actually, the framework that we use for customers to connect to custom systems is the same that we use for building our own connectors. So it's a sort of complete framework in that sense. Let's see. So there's another question here, which is from an attendee. Do you have any use cases for report-to-report processes like journals, reconciliation, intercompany transactions? I mean, the simple answer is yes. And in fact, the concept of an intercompany transaction, where you're looking at processes that flow across business units, across companies, it really speaks precisely, Jeremy, to the point you were making earlier about silos. Many organizations look to optimize the work they're doing within, say, their division, and fail to recognize the full end-to-end customer experience that they're creating, with their end customers. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Well, it's more common than it should be, but I think a lot of it is, certainly in recent years, a lot of, shall we say, customer-facing initiatives have been launched by, sales folk, marketing people, line of business managers who are concerned about their own, departmental well-being and not actually being part of, a more sort of coherent enterprise. And I think, it really does need a end-to-end perspective to really sort of deliver progress. Doing it piecemeal just reinforces those silos, and it's an expensive way of doing it.
Right, but and I think that's partly because your customer experiences their relationship with your organization in an end-to-end context. They don't experience it the way you're organized. I don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, very
as a consumer, I don't. Sorry, go ahead, Jeremy.
Well, I was just going to say a very simple example. A couple of weeks ago, because it was getting cold here, I decided to order a fleece. And the ordering side, was very simple, and confirmation emails and all that, went perfectly. But it never turned up on the day it was supposed to. And it took them about 3 days to figure out that the order hadn't actually been placed on their delivery systems. So, you can promise the earth, but unless you deliver it as well, the experience is broken.
Sure, and I think that speaks to, I think a lot of organizations have spent a lot of time thinking about the front end of the customer process, building, pretty websites and, voice interfaces and these sort of, mobile apps, et cetera, and forgotten that what actually drives value from a customer perspective is the back end of the process, delivering it on time, making sure it's full and incomplete, that the product is high quality, that it's made to order. These are the things that actually drive much of the customer value.
Absolutely.
So someone else in the typed in the Q&A panel, which I would encourage everyone to do, can Celonis look at a process? I'm going to edit the question slightly. Can Celonis look at a business process where the underlying transactions span multiple operational systems at the same time, multiple ERPs or even a range of different systems? And the simple answer to that question is yes. Just from a demo perspective, it's often simpler to show something, in my example, running on top of SAP ECC. But very typically, it's actually most of the Celonis customers have examples of processes where they have multiple ERPs or multiple ERPs with different versions, or even a few ERPs and a couple of custom systems that are working together to mediate that business process. And certainly the example of, just as an example, the example of Siemens, they had multiple, in their case, SAP and other systems running across multiple geographies, multiple plants, these sorts of things. So certainly a good example of that. Another question that came up, will the Celonis Intelligent Business Cloud sit on-premise on the company server or run in the cloud? And the answer is both and. So it's certainly the case that the Intelligent Business Cloud runs on our cloud, but we also support what we call a hybrid deployment model, where you can run some sets of the componentry on your servers in your data center, close to your data, and actually have the data and processing local to your server, and simply the user interface on the Intelligent Business Cloud. So that is absolutely the case. And then another excellent question that came up. And again, I'm going to edit the question slightly. The question asks, are the recommendations listed in the action engine, the last part of that demo I showed, are the recommendations listed in the action engine more like a kind of a black box, or more like a kind of rules engine? If the order is more than 3 days late, then tell me. And the answer is both. Although, so the rule-based model, if the order is 3 days late, then tell me to expedite it, is certainly useful, and there are certainly cases in which that's valuable. But it's quite a simple example. Where we see more value and where we've seen customers who are adopting the action engine get more value is where we actually leverage the machine learning capabilities of the action engine to make more probabilistic recommendations based on the underlying process. So rather than simply saying every order that's more than 3 days late, I need to know about, we say, what step in this process is a bottleneck, and how could I intervene in the process to improve the probability that the process operates smoothly. And the reason that Celonis is uniquely suited to do this is we have visibility into every instance of that process historically, and we can evaluate the next instance of that process in the context of that historical experience. So we actually build machine learning algorithms that look at the history, that's how we train the model, and then predict based on new data that's coming in what the likely outcomes are, but then also provide a mechanism, a framework for intervening in that process and improving it. So, I mean, the answer is both, but I think the more valuable is where we can actually apply machine learning techniques. I don't know, Jeremy, if you want to sort of, it was a pretty product-specific question, but the concept of applying intelligence to machine intelligence to transformation in the business process. I was curious if that's something you've seen in clients looking at. Is that, or is that more sort of on the cutting edge? How do you think about that?
Well, I mean, machine learning is popping up everywhere, it seems, and I think where it helps sift through, huge quantities of data and make predictions on the likely consequences in whatever sort of field it happens to be, or provide sort of intelligent guidance. I think that's just incredibly helpful. Helping people get to the root of the problem faster, and also, if they're looking to redesign processes, to get a sense of the impact of those redesigned services, and has it cured the problem, or has it created another problem that they were unaware of? So I think machine learning is definitely here to stay, and it's becoming increasingly embedded in various systems and across the enterprise with the more advanced organizations.
Sure. Well, and sort of continue on that thread for a moment, and I think probably based on the line of questioning we've been going down, someone else asked, just typed in, can you give a bit more understanding of what sort of AI is at work behind the action engine? And that is a phenomenal question. So from just backing up a step into the question, the framework at play is something that we introduced in the product some time ago, which is this concept of a connection to a set of Python libraries. And so we have access to a whole bunch of that kind of material. So based on that technical foundation, we're using a whole set of machine learning algorithms that are available using the Python frameworks to basically build machine learning algorithm models of the underlying process, and then actually of the flow of the data through that process. So just the concept is, historically with process mining, you would look at all of the instances. In my example, I'd used order to cache. So we'd be looking at every instance of an order, right? That was the entity. And we were looking at how it flowed through the process. We looked at the historical data and we sort of analyzed it looking backwards. What we've done here is sort of add to that the ability to use the historical data to train a model that understands, that it can sort of speak the process language, which we internally call PQL, process query language. And then we use that to actually create predictions about the future. And so what would happen in this context, you'd be looking at, in my example, I had 1 million sales order items, but we'd be looking at the historical data, say all million, and then a new order comes in, and then we can apply the model that we've built using the Python libraries. We can actually apply that model to the next order that comes in and ask the question for this. So let me give you a very practical example. An order comes in that for a customer that requires a credit check. Well, again, using my example, you could see that the credit check added 4 days on average to the order. That's something that the machine learning algorithm model would have picked up and would say, well, this one is more at risk of not making the delivery date because of that factor. But of course, it's looking at hundreds or even thousands of factors, not just one. So for example, what raw materials are needed to create this order? Is the customer a new customer, old customer? Is it, if they ask for express shipping or not? I mean, I could, so you get the idea. Like there could be many of these different algorithms. So that was that. Probably a more long-winded answer than needed. Let's see. So a couple of people have asked, and I'm going to group a couple of these, about automation. And it's a great question. So one of the values of the underlying process mining technology is that we can understand whether or not a step in a process is an automated step, or what proportion of the instances of that step are automated and what proportion are manual. And we know that because we can see in the underlying operational system whether the step was taken by a human being, i.e. manual, or by an agent, i.e. an RPA bot, or an API call. And using that information, we can actually help, and actually, if I had more time in my demo, sometimes I'll actually show that. We'll show the automation of the different steps in that process. And so as such, it becomes a really powerful tool for driving automation rates. And again, so there are a couple of questions around whether or not this technology is useful in driving automation. And if I just sort of add very briefly, I think it's very valuable to figure out where to apply automation. It's also valuable to figuring out if the automation techniques that you've applied are having the intended benefit. So in many cases, you see people apply automation only to break another step in the process, or to have that automation work for a few weeks, and then those crazy users, they kind of go around the system, and now you're there's a new sort of manual set of steps in the process. And lastly, I'd say it's a very valuable technique for building business case around automation. So if you can show what steps aren't automated and what the cost or customer impact of those steps is, that's incredibly valuable. I don't know, Jeremy, if you want to comment on automation as a driver for some of the conversations you were talking about earlier.
Well, I think if you have identified, where the processes aren't working and where there is a lot of manual activity taking place in order to complete those the tasks within those process, then I think that would be obvious candidates for robotic process automation capabilities.
Sure. Or for that matter, any other kind of, whether that's, building an actual API call as opposed to the RPA.
Or possibly, identifying a microservice that might be able to fill that gap, that functional gap.
Yeah. Exactly. Good. All right. Well, look, I think we've made our way through. I have to give ourselves some credit here, Jeremy. We've made our way through quite a few of these questions. But there are a handful that we didn't get to, or ones that I felt were not generally interesting, so to speak, meaning interesting to the specific person versus the general audience. And we will make sure that we follow up on any of the questions that didn't get answered with a personal answer via email. I am super appreciative for everyone joining today's webinar. As I did indicate earlier, this is being recorded. Of course, it will be available to you, to share and to review later. I want to very sincerely and personally thank Jeremy for making the time, joining, and sharing his insights at the top of the call. They were incredibly valuable. And with that, I will round us out. Thank everyone for joining, and wish everyone a great rest of the day and week.